Hi, my name is Chris Freeman. This is an AP Environmental Science review for my students, and I want y'all to be thinking today about the sustainability triangle, or the ideas behind sustainability when you're thinking about FRQs. So our focus right now is going to be, let's take a breath. We know a lot of content for the AP Environmental Test. When we're trying to think through how to structure and write things down for the FRQs, oftentimes they isolate how will this situation impact the economy, or how will this situation impact the social structure of humanity? How will this affect the environment? So I really want you to be thinking about these things as separate entities in isolation, because if you're asked a question about how does a coal-fired power plant affect the economy negatively, you might know a lot of information and really have been hunkering and eager to write information about how it affects the environment, but it's not asking that. And so you could write all day about the environment and get that question wrong, even if you had good content, because you didn't relate it to economy. And so let's just think about that as a sample question for a second. Coal-fired power plants, how do they affect the economy? Well, negatively, right? So one way a coal-fired power plant would affect the economy would be they put out a primary pollutant, sulfur dioxide, and that primary pollutant can then mix with water and become acid rain. And acid rain can get on buildings. Think of fancy marble banks, or even think about beautiful art sculptures that are around that are made of marble, and they can begin to dissolve because marble's made of calcium carbonate, and that neutralizes the acidity of the water but dissolves in the process. And so we can be impacted by having building infrastructure have to be repaired, sculptures having to be repaired, and that sort of thing. That's an example of one economic impact. Another economic impact, just even related to sulfur dioxide, could be on farms. If we have reduced farm yield because of soil acidity, then farmers can't make as much money with selling their produce. You can also look at particulate pollution from coal-fired power plants. This is all economy. Remember, we're isolating economy. So if you have particulate pollution, that's PM 2.5 or PM 10, that's going to get into the air. People are going to breathe that in and have lung-related illnesses like asthma. And if more people go to the doctor, if more people go to the hospital because of lung-related issues, then that is going to drive up their healthcare costs. And so right there, we've made all the linkers that we need to. And so usually they'll ask for a negative or positive, and then you're expected to have a discussion point. So you really have to think, okay, did I list the negative? Yes, it is going to affect our healthcare cost. Then you need to explain how it's going to affect our healthcare cost. So if you say particulate pollution from coal-fired power plants will hurt healthcare costs, okay, that's part of a point. Then the other part will be by saying particulate pollution comes out of smokestacks from a coal-fired power plant. People breathe that in. That gives them lung problems like asthma, and they need to go to the doctor more. That runs up their bill. And over time, healthcare costs are going to increase as a result of the frequency of going to the doctor's office. So there's an example of economy and honing in on one part of the sustainability triangle. There are many other things that we can think about here in terms of environment and ecosystem destruction and that sort of thing, but you want to be prepared to sort of practice going through these three different situations, and you can make up your own. One that came up a number of years ago was on anaerobic digesters. And that really freaked people out because they weren't super familiar with this as a concept. But it's the idea where you make energy from essentially waste organic material, animal turds, and old food that you can put into an oxygen-starved environment that's warm, and you can capture all this methane from the anaerobic bacteria that eat it all up, and then use the methane to make energy. So there's two ways that you can make energy from an anaerobic digester. Once you get the methane, you can either burn the methane to boil water to turn to steam, to turn a turbine, to spin a generator, and that will create power. Or you can actually use the methane to be part of a combustion engine and to be used as the combustive gas in a combustion engine, and that too can make power. So there's a couple options there. But if you were asked to discuss two environmental benefits of using anaerobic digestion, you could say, well, we'll use less fossil fuels. That's an environmental benefit. Well, you need to discuss that, right? So you need to list a reason for the environment, not for economics, not for social, but just for the environment. And so you could say, oh, well, animal turds can get into animal poop, fecal coliform can get into waterways, and that's we can have nutrient loading into waterways, and that creates cultural eutrophication. So if we can reduce the amount of cultural eutrophication and dead zones, then that will be an environmental benefit because we'll have more happy fish swimming around in a lake, river, ocean, what have you. And so that's a great example of an environmental benefit. And then you can think through other environmental benefits like we would reduce the dependency on fossil fuels. Great. So that would reduce the amount of sulfur emissions, which would reduce the amount of acid rain, which can acidify soils and reduce biodiversity in deciduous forests or in grasslands or wherever you might be. I really like to think about a place that I'm familiar with. I know deciduous forests because I live in Virginia Beach and we have a lot of deciduous forests. I know squirrels live there. I understand specific species that are there. And so I can always think through, how will a deciduous forest be affected if a coal-fired power plant is out there? Or how will we benefit if we remove a coal-fired power plant because we have an anaerobic digester there? These are important things. Also, I don't want you to forget about aesthetic pollution. If you don't fully know an answer, oftentimes you can think through, particularly if they're talking about power, aesthetic pollution as a social issue, right? So if there's a problem, if they say discuss a negative social impact of having wind turbines in a society, you can say, oh, well, it's aesthetically unpleasing to look at it. It hurts the joy that people get from being able to view nature. And that's a very legitimate answer. You could also tie that back into economic if they asked you to, because that might reduce home sale costs, right? If your home was by a landfill, it would also drop economic costs. So, aesthetic pollution, you can tie back into economy, you can use for social. It's harder to use that for environmental, but that's something that you can hold on to and think through. If you don't know other options there, you can think through, well, does aesthetic pollution work here to isolate for one of the variables? And that can be a helpful strategy. Remember, you need to write in complete sentences. And you really want to connect the dots. You want to make sure that they understand fully that you get to your conclusion and don't assume that they can grasp what you're talking about. You want to make sure, within around 5 sentences or so, you've completely painted a picture for them that gets them through the discussion points. But remember, if they're asking you for a benefit or a negative, you don't just list the benefit or the negative. You also need to discuss and explain how, right? And then you'll get your discussion points as well. Also, on an FRQ, sometimes you don't know the answers to a few of the FRQ components. Keep reading. Don't give up on an FRQ. Oftentimes, the very bottom portion of the FRQ will be a very different question altogether. If you're talking about coal-fired power plants, the last question might be on nuclear power plants. Right, and you might feel more comfortable with that content, and that's where you can put down your information and salvage some points. Okay, the key here is to do your best, and I'm rooting for you. If you have any questions, all right, let's be in touch and let's work through this last push. Okay, good luck.